Hello world of YouTube and welcome to my September... Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for September of 2019. I have 12 albums to get to this month, a lot more than I thought I would because there was a point where I feel like I wasn't really spending much time with music, but I just kept finding release after release after release the more I dug, so let's just dive the fuck in.
Churning, burning, I'm beat ready to knock some teeth out of his ass. Late night.
I was very excited for this record. I think that Brockhampton has solidified themselves as one of the acts to follow this decade and in the ensuing years I'm sure to follow, but Ginger does what I think people were wanting Iridescence to do. I get why in hindsight Iridescence may not sit well with people and be more of a divisive experience, but Ginger seems to be a solidified bop. You know, while I like Iridescence and I think that it's bold for the band, I like that Ginger sees them pulling those experimental touches and ideas seen on Ginger and pushing them more towards a sound that feels indebted to what put them on the map in the first place with the Saturation trilogy. I'm not against bands experimenting, and that's why I respect Iridescence a lot, and I think that there's still a ton of songs on that record that stand up to anything they did on the Saturation era, but Ginger just feels like a good therapeutic experience. You know, you can definitely tell the band is going through some shit still, but they're pulling together a more cohesive listening experience on Ginger without sacrificing that experimental edge that put them on the map with the Saturation trilogy and was seen in spades on Iridescence. You know, this album is kind of a tale of two records because you have songs like No Halo and St. Percy and Boy Bye that feel like musings of experimenting with the Saturation sound again. Some of the production feels very indebted to 2000s hip-hop, which is one of the things I really love about Brockhampton in general. But then you also have the sort of interlude Ask Kevin Belongs to You, which has Slow Tie doing his goddamn thing. You have tracks like Dearly Departed and Sugar and the closer Victor Roberts, which feel like an extension of the Saturation sound, but drenching it more and drearier soundscapes and having the members really air their grievances. You know, one of the things I like about this record is that it is not afraid to get harsh and distorted, especially on Dearly Departed, which might be my favorite song on the record, and has Dom just losing it in the fucking booth. And there's a real power and emotion to it that I feel like is potent and is present on a lot of the record. I think the closer, Victor Roberts, does a good job at kind of letting the record kind of wash away with all of these refrains, which is a huge mantra of the record. You know, Victor Roberts, Boy Bye, all have just hook after hook after hook. Lots of catchy mantras that I feel like were almost meditative for the band. Like, I think it works. I think it works wonders, and I think it's effective in showing the band's therapeutic crossing over where they are now. I think this record is powerful. I think it's really bold for the band, and I like it a lot. I like a lot of the sounds of this record. It's a good transitional record as well from a Seasons, because of its bright, summery sentiments and its more cold-feeling instrumentals. This thing, super good. Probably going to end up somewhere on my of the year list. It's getting an 8 out of 10 for me, personally.
This shit bliss, I'm so rich.
I wanted to like this record more than I did. I think there's some elements in here that are interesting, and I still really like Post Malone as a person. He still seems like a very genuine guy. But on Hollywood's Bleeding, he doesn't commit to keeping a consistent experiment going. And I feel like because he included fucking Sunflower on here, even though it has a great warm-up track in Staring at the Sun, which has a good hook from SZA, it, as a little two-song section, embodies the disjointed feeling this record presents as a whole. It's weird because there's some great moments on here that I feel like expand upon the sounds and Beer Bongs and Bentleys really well. Like on Wow. I thought Wow was a great song to drop at the end of last year, and I was hoping it would end up on here. It also kind of reinforces that maybe he doesn't have the most confidence in this record, but I like Wow. I think it's a good song. I don't think it's a good closer. I think that he should have maybe flipped Hollywood's Bleeding and Wow, because Hollywood's Bleeding, while opening the record on this different kind of note with this guitar intro that almost sounds like it's lifted from a B-tier Red Hot Chili Peppers record, it doesn't cap things off to a good start. And neither does Saint Tropez. This album takes a couple tracks to really get started, you know, because I like the other single from this record, Circles. I think it's okay. I like Goodbyes well enough, but I feel like this record tries to do a handful of things but doesn't commit to them. You know, the rock-tinged stuff comes back up in Take What You Want by having Ozzy Osbourne nail this fucking hook and have a guitar solo that is lifted straight out of Bark at the Moon. Like, there's a lot of ideas on here where I feel like Post is wanting to branch out, but he's doing a soft version of that, and it's underwhelming. You know, for every good idea, there's like two others waiting in the wings to set this thing back. Because while I like those songs, there's an Enemies where I feel like DaBaby outshines Post on his own song, or a Die For Me where I don't really like the hook, and I hate Halsey, so I don't really like her presence on here. Or Young Thug on Goodbyes. You know, I like Goodbyes, but I don't like Young Thug on it. And yeah, I don't know. This record feels like it's having an identity crisis. It feels like Post trying to branch out, but feeling stuck in the things that weighed down his last effort to me. So I'm giving it the same score I gave Beer Bongs and Bentleys. I'm giving this a 6. I wanted to like it more than I did. I really did, because I like Post. Again, I'd be friends with Post Malone. I'd love to have a drink with Post Malone. You know, he seems like a really cool dude. I just wish I liked his music more than I do him.
They say can't call this back. What? Heard it on the radio. Give you fine age settle while these dudes craft singles. Nice and smack.
So I'm going to be talking about these two records together, even though I listened to them apart in the month, because they're by the same artist. You know, Droog dropped 2 records this year, Transportation, and it wasn't even close. One sees Droog kind of expanding the foundation he laid forth on PAX, and the other sees him falling back into the same ideas that he explored on PAX, but without Anthony Jeselnik kind of flavoring up the track listing. Now, It Wasn't Even Close is the former, and Transportation is the latter. I like It Wasn't Even Close a little more because it has, while both feel very indebted to the mid-90s sound, It Wasn't Even Close at least breaks up Droog's sounds and flows and topics with some guest features. Not all of which I think knock it out of the park, but I think this does a good job at presenting an expansion on PAX sound while keeping it firmly gripped in the 90s East Coast boom bap sound. You know, the whole Nas comparison makes a lot of sense with Transportation. That feels more like a weird B-tier Nas record, but It Wasn't Even Close feels more like a Doom record. You know, the instrumentals on it are a lot more playful and boisterous, or they at least do more with that sound laid forth on PAX, like on Babushka, or on RST, which features MF Doom on it, or even Ugly Truth, which has a really nice sound to it. My issue with this record is more Droog himself. While he does lay down some heat on a lot of this record, he gets a little problematic at times, and while, you know, you could argue politics separate from artists, I feel like once you merge them together, it's a little hard to do so. I said the same thing about Nas and Freddie Gibbs on their records, and I enjoyed them just the same. It's easier to criticize an artist for their politics if they use, like, transphobic slurs in their verses and stuff like that. It's not as prevalent on Transportation, because Transportation feels more like Droog on autopilot, which, again, is a gift and a curse. Droog can pen some good verses, he can pen some tight verses, and he can sound dope while doing it, and he can write a song about having, like, I think a prostitute girlfriend, like on Monthly, where he has a woman that he only sees once a month, he pays to see her, but they have this weird relationship now. He can have that while also just having weird vignette things like Getting Off the Plane interlude or the Rocket Launch interlude that makes it feel more like, again, a Diet MF Doom project / a Diet Nas project. He's firing on mid-cylinders on Transportation, is what I'm saying.
I will say I do have a bit of admiration for the instrumentals on Transportation, because while they don't maybe have as much dynamics as on It Wasn't Even Close, it does lend to a creamy listening experience that is, again, a gift and a curse. It makes the whole album feel like this one consistent experience, and the continued allusions back to Transportation reinforce that. It just, again, on repeated listens, leaves this kind of less than memorable experience, even if the whole album has highlights. It's almost like if Ka didn't have as bold of a production and didn't laid less into the Wu-Tang inspired allegories on Honor Kill the Samurai or Orpheus. And what sets those records apart is, while they have this sort of one lyrical concept, they dive into other aspects of it more dynamically, and that's what I think sets a rapper like Ka above a rapper like your old Droog in the 90s revival scene to me.
Both see him tackling a similar formula, he's just tackling it in very different ways. Personally, like I said, I like It Wasn't Even Close more, even though it gets a little more problematic in its lyrics. I'm giving that a 7, while I give Transportation a 6. Both are fine in their own regard, but neither wowed me quite like Pax did when he first came out on the scene. And I think that is kind of relevant to Droog himself, because on Babushka he talks a lot about his fame and coming up, and I feel like that is indicative of his thing. You know, while other rappers have come out like Ka that sound a lot like East Coast boom bap and are very reminiscent of other popular rappers out of the New York scene, these two records embody the greatness, the strengths and weaknesses to being a part of that scene. It's easy to fall back on your heels and turn into like an Elzai. So this next record was actually all over my social media feeds, and that's why I checked it out. I took the bait, and Sub Pop got me. They got me to check out their newest signee, or maybe not their newest signee, but the debut record from a newer signee. That is Shannon Lay's August, which feels very perfect for the season we're coming up on, and I like this record a lot. I don't think Death Up Close would have been a good first taste for this record, because it paints a good representation of the album sound, but also showcases something that isn't really on the record at all outside of that song. But this record itself is a sort of contemporary folk indie record with a lot of reverb guitars, a lot of really good guitar work as well, some really nice acoustic lines littered throughout this thing. And Shannon Lay has a very haunting voice that is like layered very, very well throughout this thing. You know, I love tracks like Wild and November. I think they feel very intimate, and they paint a lot of good pictures in their lyrics, as it does throughout a lot of the record. But Death Up Close might be one of my favorite songs of the year, because it does that, and it adds a saxophone. There's a guest saxophone musician on Death Up Close whose name is right here, because I can't think of it right now. But I love the addition to that. I think it sounds really cool when paired with the guitars that are on that song. And it's a cool song. It's a cool idea. And I think it would have been interesting to see that explored throughout the entire record. Again, I love that it's in the opening track, and I think that it's a good starter for the record, but I don't think it was a good first single, because it gives people a different impression for what this record's going to be. Still great. Still love this record. I love a lot of how Shannon tells the story, writes lyrics. It almost reminds me a lot of Wolfie's Just Fine's record that came out in 2016. It gives me... I listened to it for similar feelings, only it sounds a little more indie than that record. Her guitar work is just really well nuanced, and her voice just sounds so good. It feels so warming in a very cold way. You know, the way that she layers her vocals when she does is beautiful. And I like this thing a lot. I'm giving it an 8. It is a beautiful record, and if you like indie folk singer-songwriter driven stuff that talks about her life before this moment and where she's at right now, listen to it. Listen to this record. It's good. It's good at being reflective in the best way possible. And again, it's a great fall record. I'll be spinning this a lot over the next couple of months. I can guarantee you that. So I actually haven't talked about Korn in a while, but one of my most popular discography review is my Korn one, because I really liked Korn a lot back in the day, and I still like them a decent amount now. They're one of those bands that I liked when I was primarily a metalhead that I can still revisit, and I think out of the scene that they were from, they are one of the bands that has had a pretty good shelf life, and they've made themselves to be a pretty decent namestay in an age where nu metal is viewed as cringy and terrible. And on The Nothing, the band explores more morbid, dark territory in a way that was different than on The Serenity of Suffering, which I did listen to when it came out. I didn't make a video on it because I was kind of already done with the old discography review format, and I wasn't really planning on doing any more discography review updates, as has been evident by the fact that I haven't done one since I stopped doing them. But I thought The Serenity of Suffering was fine. It was Korn pulling off their shtick a lot better than I feel like people were expecting. It was a more back-to-basic sound because Head was back in the band. I don't want to say because Head was back in the band, but Head was back in the band, so it was dense and thick with the guitars. And while the album cover sucks, it was a lot better than the album cover kind of led on. I think I gave it a 6 back in the day on Rate Your Music, and I pretty much feel the same way still. It's fine. And on The Nothing, while some of the riff work gets a little derivative, I feel like songs like You'll Never Find Me and The Darkness Is Revealing are kind of the same. It doesn't hold the band back from exploring that dark territory that put them on the map in the first place. You know, I don't want to say this is almost an expansion on their Back to Basics formula from the last record, but it feels like it. You know, a lot of the textures here are very mechanical and dark and cold, but Jonathan is exploring some dark shit on here. You know, he sings about the trauma that he felt, that he sang about on Daddy. You know, he talks about the loss of his wife and his mother. You know, he's going through some shit. You know, while the opener could be seen as kind of cringy and rough because he's just screaming into the booth, it feels like a genuine slice of a real breakdown, and it sucks. You know, it sucks to see a guy go through such hard times. But I think that the band pulls together some good moments on here. You know, while I don't like all of the hook work, I feel like Can You Hear Me and Idiosyncrasies choruses feel a little unnecessary.
And I feel like that comes to a head on the song Harder, which has probably my least favorite hook on the album. It sticks out like a sore thumb, and it's not like Korn haven't done good hooks before, but they just feel so ham-fisted on this record for some reason.
They almost feel like Korn trying to capture sounds that were seen on, like, Issues, when they're not doing that, and they're just writing dense riffs, or they're writing some really heavy moments. That's where this album shines. This album has some missteps outside of that. I don't really like The Ringmaster. It's a song that doesn't really do anything for me, and the consistent sounds of almost like carnival-esque things that pop up throughout the track listing don't do anything for me. They've never been a sound that I think works for Korn. You know, I think Korn's at their best when they're just angry and just super dense about it, you know, or Jonathan is just grieving and going through some shit. You know, Jonathan has a good way at channeling his grief in some good ways, and that's shown in spades on here. You know, his growls feel, you know, harsher than they did on the last couple of records, and this thing shines in a way that I wasn't expecting. I like how again, cold it feels. I like the mechanical touches that code it. It almost feels like a transition from, like, Take a Look in the Mirror to See You on the Other Side, this record. And I'm happy about that, because I like those records fine enough, and I feel like this is a good way to transition those sounds, or toy with them in ways that feels transitional in retrospect, or if you were to kind of piece them in your own sort of way. But this record's good. It's fine. It's solid. I'd give it like a 7. You could do a lot worse with this genre and with this band. You know, I think it's a good step up from their last record, and it's kind of on par with the paradigm shift to me, personally. I was a fan of Veteran when it came out. However, I didn't seem to like it as much as some of my friends and peers did. You know, I gave it a 7 when it came out, and it's a record that I still enjoy and I'll go back to and throw on, especially the tracks that I enjoy off of it. And I feel like on that record, Peggy did a good job at carving out his own identity in this kind of glitch industrial scene. And on All My Heroes Are Cornballs, he does a better job at carving himself even more so into that sound and make his voice that much more unique in this industrial glitch scene. I love this thing a lot more than I did Veteran. It's clicking with me more, at least personally. I was talking to my buddy CJ about Peggy, who he is a big JpegMafia fan. He fucking loves Veteran. It's like one of his favorite records of the decade, seemingly. He's a big fan of JpegMafia, and he likes this record as well. And I was telling him what I like about him, and he didn't see it, but I'm going to express it here. One of the things I think makes JpegMafia stand out in this scene of very brash, harsh instrumentals and really abrasive vocal deliveries is that he has that in instances, and it's here too, like on Keenan vs. Kel and on Moments of Rap Grow Old and Die. But what sets him apart is his delivery, his flow, and how he writes his verses. And those three elements to me feel more indebted to like a Childish Gambino, which I know is a voice that people don't really resonate with in hip-hop, but I feel like especially on Veteran and this, he's doing a better job at being like the internet's rapper.
Anytime he references internet culture or has anything that sounds or tied to internet culture, it just feels more natural when it comes from Peggy to me.
Than a Childish Gambino or a Joji were trying to be in their own respects. And I feel like on this record, with these really well-crafted, punchy instrumentals, like on the title track, on Grimy Waifu, again on Keenan vs. Kel, the Dots Freestyle Remix, any of the interlude songs, it's just clicking so much better. And I think it's because on this record, while he still has his amped delivery, it's a little more laid back, and he sings on a lot of this record, and I dig it, man. I dig it a lot. I think BBW is fucking dope. I like Grimy Waifu a fuck ton. And again, he doesn't lose that character, that style that he had on Veteran. It just feels more fine-tuned, and it feels more personal. It feels more carved into the sound he was trying to make on Veteran, and I feel like that's why it resonates with me more. I don't feel like there's a conflict between this scene and him. They've melded much better together, and he still finds a way to stand out amongst this crop that's in this scene, that's burgeoned in this decade. And I like this thing a lot. I think it's fucking phenomenal. I think fucking Peggy just nails it more often than not on here. And it's really good. If you liked Veteran and you haven't for some reason checked out Heroes Are Cornballs yet, you're missing out on one of the better records of the year to me personally. Me personally, I'm feeling an 8. I think this thing is very awesome. And yeah, again, if you're sleeping on this, stop sleeping.
The moon grows smaller.
Like I said in my comeback album tier list video, the Pixies have had a rough decade. But I think they've been slowly getting back to where they used to be from a songwriting and album constructing perspective. And that is the same on Beneath the Ire. I feel like this is still just another step up from Head Carrier and Indie Cindy, but not quite to the level of Trump Lamont or Bossa Nova. But this does feel like they're almost there. They're like treading that line. This record is very, very solid. Paz's bass work is much more potent, and it feels like they're being less derivative than they were on Head Carrier. They're writing better songs here that don't really tread on... They don't sound like they're ripping off Where Is My Mind like they were on Head Carrier. It still has songs that feel a little out of place from the rest of the track listing, like Los Surfers Muertos, which, while maybe lyrically feels tied to some of the more gothic, macabre themes of the record, like on A Graveyard Hill, or In the Arms of Mrs. Margaret Kane, or Silver Bullet, this still has moments that feel a little kind of tepid for them. But again, this record really is a lot more solid than their last couple of records. And I feel like the shining star on this record is definitely Joey Santiago, whose guitar work on here is crunchy, it's good, it's driving, or it adds a lot to the atmosphere that the band is playing with. I like that this record is brief. I like that it's tight. The band sounds tighter here than they did on Head Carrier. Really, my biggest issue with this record that's been an issue on all of the Pixies comeback records is just the vocals, man. Like, I don't know what happened, but the vocals just don't feel as good here as they did on their Golden Age material.
I will say they sound better here than they did on Head Carrier, and again, Paz's vocals feel stronger and more potent on here as well.
They probably feel aged, but aged in the weirdest way possible. Like, while I feel like it starts off great with the first two tracks of Mrs. Mark of Cain and Graveyard Hill, I also really like This Is My Fate and Silver Bullet. I feel like the last couple of tracks are good, they're solid, but they're a little more forgettable. The record kind of flounders out on its last leg, but it doesn't underwhelm. It isn't bad. It's just underwhelming. Personally, I'm feeling a 6 on this record. It is very solid. If you like the Pixies, you'll probably like bits of this record. You know, when Blink-182 came back, I was excited. I liked Neighborhoods a lot. I talked about that in the comeback albums list. But California, I was a little more underwhelmed by, and it wasn't because of Matt Skiba. It was more because the production just changed for the worse. I didn't like a lot of the production on that record. I thought the vocals were obnoxiously mixed, as was a lot of the instrumentation. I didn't mind the lyrical content. It felt like they were trying to initiate Matt Skiba in the same way they did Tom DeLonge, with some fun songs. You know, I liked some songs. I like Built This Pool a lot, and there were some moments on it outside of that were fun. Where I feel like California was kind of Matt Skiba's growing pains, this is more him really coming into his own with this band. I think this record is better than California, and I like it about as much as I do Neighborhoods. I think that there's elements of it that I don't enjoy. I don't really like the electronic moments, like on Blame It On My Youth, which was a really bad first single. I mean, a lot of people have said that. Or on No Heart to Speak Of. I think that the record has more shining moments on it than California. I really liked the writing on I Really Wish I Hated You, and Heaven, and Dark Side, and I like the punkier moments like Ransom and Generational Divide. I like that they're still trying to make songs like that, and they feel less like Blink punk and more like, it feels more skate punk than anything. And I'm gonna be honest, I've never really listened to Alkaline Trio, so that could be where Skiba's influence is pouring in even more. But where this record falls apart to me, outside of the electronics, is some of the production. I don't like the vocals on this thing. They sound worse than they did on California. You know, while there's lyrics that really sound like an aged band trying to fit in their scene at their age, a lot of the production ideas feel the opposite. They feel like they're trying so hard to go pop. The guitars have a nice crunch to them, but the vocals almost sound auto-tuned. They sound robotic, and it's obnoxious. And while my first listen of this thing was really impressed because I was expecting something a lot worse, I kept getting annoyed with the production on this thing, and it hindered a lot of the record for me. You know, while I think Matt's guitars are really tight, I think Travis stomps all over this fucking record. There's a lot of moments on here where his drums really shine. Those vocals are obnoxious and feel like they're tied to a lot of the trope scene more in pop than they do in punk. I think the pop punk production, like on the guitars and bass and stuff, is great, it's tight, it's crunchy, and it's good. And again, the writing on tracks like Dark Side and even Pin the Grenade and On Some Emo Shit feels self-aware and reflective in the right ways, but this record is not wholly a consistent piece, which is a lot of my issues with Neighborhood. It's not as consistent, but I feel like because its production is worse than Neighborhood's, if I were to continue this in the discography like I did years ago at a discography review on Blink-182. I'd put this above California, which would be probably on the bottom of my list, if not above like their first couple of records, because they also had really bad production, but below stuff like Neighborhoods and Untitled and Enema of the State. It's not that bad. I see this record getting really panned reviews from a critical stance. If you like Blink-182, or you like the sounds that were toyed with on California and on Neighborhoods and their Untitled record, but you want to see it a little more down the line of life, you might like 9. It's solid. I'm giving it a 6. I was thinking more towards a 7, but as I continued to re-listen to this record, the production just became much more of a problem to me and a hindrance. Which I cannot say for Pollinator by Cloud Rat. I've been waiting for this record. You guys know I loved their split they put out earlier this year with The World is a Vampire, and I was hoping, I was like, maybe Cloud Rat's gonna drop another solo record. They haven't done it since 2015. And boys, let me tell you, boys and goys, this is good shit. From second one, this thing is abrasive, it is sharp, it is jagged, it is so crusty. It is very, very good. It is a dense, erratic mess with a lot of dry production and knows when to break up those grindcore blast beat segments with some true sludgy guitars that feel like sandpaper to the ears. This doesn't sound like a pleasant experience, I'm sure. It sounds a little cathartic. It sounds a little... I love this thing. I adore this thing. It is one of my favorite heavy releases of the year. It fulfills everything I wanted from a project from Cloud Rat. I mean, tracks like Seven Heads and The Mad, when they transition from the sludgy, just chugging riffs to the breakneck fucking grindcore elements. It is so satisfying every single time. Their vocals are just like boiling nails. It is very, very good. If you listen to this type of music and you haven't checked out Pollinator, you are fucking up tremendously. It is powerful. It is emotive. Everyone in the band just keeps it tight. Like I said about Otoboke Beaver, they switch shit up a lot, but it's from slow intensities to fast intensities at, again, a breakneck pace. I mean, it is good. It is brief, but it is very good. They don't overstay their welcome. Everything feels cooked to perfection, and this is primo, my guys. I'm giving this a 10. This is a fucking 10. Where it stands above records like Ion by Portal is that it's brief, it's crusty, it is a nice little meal to sink your teeth into, to just let loose and have a good time.
Now I got you to get back on your feet.
This album was a request by my buddy Tyler, the dude I went to the Beast Coast concert with, and the guy that came on stream with me for Mario Maker that one time. He's a good buddy of mine. We talk music a lot. We talk hip-hop a lot, because he loves hip-hop. I love hip-hop. You guys probably knew that. But I've heard some Earthgang here and there. I've heard some of the stuff from Dreamville that they've done, which I haven't heard the full record. That's why I haven't talked about it. But I've heard some of their singles also by themselves, and I like these guys. I think that they are a good slice of Southern hip-hop. And on Mirrorland, they continue that in spades. I see a lot of people throwing around Outkast comparisons for these guys. While I get that, because they're a duo from the South that's a little left of center with their style, I don't feel like they're at that level yet. I feel like if we're going to go for voices of the South in hip-hop that more embody that, it would be Big Crit to me. Forever As Mine a Long Time is one of my favorite records of the decade, and it is just a bona fide Southern trunk knocker. But Mirrorland is really solid. It's very good. And actually, it made me realize that we have this kind of thing going on in hip-hop that was kind of going on in the early 90s when jazz rap became a thing. This whole kind of laid-back, aesthetic-driven hip-hop that people kind of smoke to is getting kind of regionalized. Dudes like Flatbush are kind of doing it in the East, in New York, and Earthgang is kind of the southern representation of it. I get a lot of meaty out of Johnny Venus's vocal delivery, and Dr. Dot is a good kind of counterpoint to that, and I think it's where a lot of people are also getting the Outkast comparisons. But I just don't think the songwriting is up to the same snuff that it is with when Outkast was around and in their heyday. I think that it's good. I think that there's moments of this that remind me of like an ATLiens, like on this side and a little bit on like Top Down and Up, but I just don't think it's as potent. I think that it's still kind of tied to the trends that, or the sound that it's rooted in. Tracks like Proud of You and Bank feel more indebted to that. I like Bank. I like Proud of You a little less. I think a lot of the tracks with the featured artists don't hit as hard for me. I think Tequila is fine. T-Pain feels a little weird on it. And I like Trippin' a lot, but I feel like this is still kind of a growth period for Earthgang. You can tell they're definitely solidifying their voice and their style, and they are very rooted to their region. I'm just curious to see where they're going to go from here, because I feel like there's elements that really tie themselves to their own unique identity, but there are also moments where they feel like they're, again, almost creating a southern version of what like Flatbush are doing on the east, or on the East Coast up in New York. But maybe that's just me. There's some groovy moments on here. There's some nice laid-back beats, and I like this thing a lot. I'm giving it a 7. It's really solid to me. I think that these two have a lot of chemistry, and I like a lot of the topics that they're rapping about on a handful of instances. They know how to have fun. They know how to get serious, and they know how to just chill the fuck out, which I also really like.
Skin is a word, love is not a sin. People are bad, people are good.
So the last album I checked out this month was a request, one that I've been meaning to get to for a little while now. It is A Different Kind of Human, Step 2 by Aurora. This was a request by Rybread28, who's been talking about it a lot in the comments. They really, anytime I bring up any sort of pop, they bring up this album as like the pinnacle of pop to come out this decade. And that's solid. I get a lot of Bjork comparisons, like sonically, especially post-era Bjork. It's like if Bjork, instead of working with like trip-hop producers or like making like a trip-hop infused tribal sound, they more went with like a new age tribal sound, which is fine. It's really cool. It's got a cool aesthetic to it, and it lends itself to a lot of the lyrics that Aurora's singing on. But I think that it feels a little one-note at times. It's very, very solid. I like a lot of the hook work on here, like on Dance on the Moon and on the astonishing opener, The River, and on Animal. There's a lot of good sounds here. To me, it's probably just a personal preference thing. My love of that new age sound only goes so far, and while I like elements of here, like on Soulless Creatures, which feels like almost an expansion on the ideas seen on Hyper Ballad from Bjork's Post, there's a point where it feels a little derivative to me as well. I like her, though. I like this album. I haven't listened to the first one, obviously. It came out last year, A Different Kind of Step, or A Different Kind of Human, Step 1. But on this record, she does a good job at creating this kind of European New Age influenced pop sound with her voice that kind of sings over these more tribal, dance-centric instrumentals. It's got some energy, it's got some atmosphere. I like this thing a lot. I think it's very spiritual and sound, and I like a lot of the imagery she paints in these lyrics here. It's good. I like this thing a lot. Again, I think it gets a little played out by the end. I feel like tracks like In Bottles and The Seed try to recapture similar ideas that are already explored earlier on the record to a lesser degree. I feel like The Seed is the closest she gets to really capturing post-era Bjork outside of Soulless Creatures, but even that, I preferred some of the other instrumentals like on Apple Tree more than on this. But yeah, this is solid. I give it like a 7. Nowhere near the worst thing I've heard this year. Probably won't end up on my end of the year list, but this is a very good pop record. If you like Bjork and you want to see what it would sound like if post-era Bjork never stopped being post-era Bjork, listen to this. It's really good, really solid, worth your time if you like that kind of stuff. And that's going to conclude the month. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for the suggestions that I've gotten. I have some still waiting in the dock that I plan on getting to throughout the rest of the year. I want to give a special thanks to my patrons for supporting me on Patreon. If you would like to join their ranks, it's linked in the description. If you like this video, be sure to like. If you like my gaming, music, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. I'm gonna get out of here. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.